On the 7th of October 2018, Jair Bolsonaro became the 38th president of Brazil, winning by a landslide. He is best known for being a climate change denier, homophobe, racist, sexist, and is an open supporter of military dictatorship. He rose to fame, or rather notoriety, after this conversation with a fellow congresswoman.
Gravei que eu sou estuprador agora. Olha, jamais ia estuprar você que você não merece.
Olha, eu espero que não.
Dá, eu te dou outra. 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 Você me chamou de estuprador? Você me chamou de estuprador? Você não é moral. Tá, vagabunda?
Apart from this, he promised to declassify all the indigenous land in the Amazon forest in order to make way for beef production and soya cultivation. He is a climate change denier and backs policies like zero regulation of guns and supports extreme torture of criminals as a state policy. Overall, he ran on platforms of neo-fascism and majoritarianism, earning him the nickname the Trump of the Tropics. The main problem actually is that Bolsonaro's election is not a single distant occurrence. Right-wing leaders like him have been rising in every single country across the world. Today, if you ask someone to name all the liberal country heads they know, how many do you think they'd be able to name? Justin Trudeau of Canada, Jacinda Ardern of New Zealand, and a Scandinavian leader at the most. On the other hand, if you ask them the same about a conservative right-wing leader, you can get a whole list of names. Donald Trump in the United States, Boris Johnson in the United Kingdom, Xi Jinping in China, Vladimir Putin in Russia, Jair Bolsonaro in Brazil, Benjamin Netanyahu in Israel, Prime Minister Narendra Modi in India, Imran Khan in Pakistan, Rodrigo Duterte in the Philippines, Shinzo Abe in Japan, Recep Tayyip Erdogan in Turkey, Viktor Orban in Hungary, and the list just goes on and on. Even in the most left-leaning countries, right-wing politics is on the rise. China's official Communist Party today is way more capitalist than the Democratic Party of the United States. Vladimir Putin shows no resemblance whatsoever to Stalin, Lenin, or any of the USSR leaders who served before him. In Canada, Justin Trudeau had an uphill task retaining his prime ministership, forming a minority government with external support, and the opposition Conservatives saw huge growth in their seats. The Liberal darling Jacinda Ardern faces her re-election bid this year, and the polls aren't too bright. Under Jeremy Corbyn, the UK Labour Party's fortunes have dwindled, and it doesn't look like they're going to win any elections in the near future. With the Castro chapters closing in Cuba, it wouldn't be surprising if there's a capitalist surge. The only exception to this trend would probably be Iceland and the Nordics. The reason probably being high public satisfaction and quality of life. If the economic slump in Europe continues, however, it wouldn't be shocking to see a conservative economic regime emerge on the lines of Ronald Reagan or Margaret Thatcher. After all, in some of those countries, the tax rates are as high as 60%. What could be the reason behind this trend? Some have argued that it could probably be a backlash against the relatively liberal regimes we saw in the 2000s. From Barack Obama's stunning victory in 2008 to Lula da Silva and Dilma Rousseff in Brazil, the last decade and a half was in a way a golden time for liberals across the world. With the end of the Reagan-Thatcher era, there was no popular conservative government anywhere in the world. The problem with this argument, however, is that the cycle is not evenly balanced out. Most of the regimes in the 2000s, including Barack Obama's, were moderate, leaning liberal at the most. A graphical comparison of past US presidents show that while Republicans are going farther and farther to the right from Nixon to Trump, Democrats were moderating out. The most liberal Democrat was Franklin D. Roosevelt about 75 years back. From him, John F. Kennedy was just liberal. Bill Clinton was liberal to moderate, and Barack Obama was left of center at best. On the other hand, Donald Trump and George W. Bush before him were the most right wing presidents in recent history. The right is moving more and more to the fringe, while the left is moving to the center and moderating out. This is creating an uneven power dynamic, and the policy tilt is getting out of balance. Just look at this image showing all the 2020 presidential candidates on the political compass. Majority of the candidates are on the authoritarian right. Here is Donald Trump at the very fringe along with the other GOP candidates. Joe Biden, who prides himself as a centrist, is at the center of this quadrant and not at the actual center. Even Elizabeth Warren, who is accused of being a communist, falls in the authoritarian right quadrant. The only known names in the libertarian left are Tulsi Gabbard and Bernie Sanders. On that note, let's look at India. While Prime Minister Modi is definitely a right-winger by Indian standards, he's pretty left of the spectrum relative to the rest of the world. Bernie Sanders is considered a radical in American politics mainly due to his advocacy for Medicare for All, a legislation to guarantee universal health coverage to every American. Prime Minister Modi did just that with Ayushman Bharat. Though it has many inherent problems and it's not as extensive and comprehensive as Bernie's plan, there's no denying that it's just as radical. No one can deny that Narendra Modi is a climate change believer, and he has actually done more to combat climate change than liberals like Justin Trudeau. No politician in India I know is pro-gun or pro-life, so those two can be kept aside. In general, if we remove the whole Hindutva rhetoric and compare him to other world leaders, irrespective of the countries of origin, Narendra Modi could actually be a liberal ideologue in his own right. And I'm pretty sure most of the Indian political spectrum falls on the libertarian left. I mean, we literally call ourselves socialists in the preamble to our constitution. I guess the communists would be at the very fringe along with the Dravidian parties. Slightly above would be the heartland giants like the Samajwadi, Bahujan Samaj, RJD, Trinamool Congress, etc., along with the YSRCP and the Aam Aadmi Party. The Congress would mirror the Joe Biden position roughly in this quadrant along with the TRS and the BJD. The BJP may go the closest to authoritarian, but it's still definitely on the left. The only party I can think of that would probably be on the libertarian right is the TDP from 1996 to 2004. The TDP under NTR actually started out left of even the Congress with schemes like the 2 rupee rice. But under Chandrababu Naidu, it moved tremendously to the right. It was in fact a golden phase of investment and development during which Hyderabad was transformed into the software giant it is today. Chandrababu Naidu cut down on populist schemes and urged everyone to make sacrifices in the short term to reap rich dividends in the long run. CEOs of top multinationals rushed to the state with investments, and the World Bank flooded the state's coffers. He won multiple awards for his economic transformation, and it all seemed to be going on very well until Dr. YSR began his Padyatra with a string of populist promises, and the TDP was wiped out of power in 2004. After this defeat, the party had to move to the left and today is on league with the likes of TRS and BJD. If there are any parties in India on the authoritarian right, they have to be the AIMIM and the Shiv Sena, more than for economic due to cultural reasons. With this background, I think it's safe to say that India has moved a lot to the right since 2014. May not be so much economically, but definitely on social issues. Now that we have indeed established that the right is on the rise, let us ask the more important question: which side is actually better? While there is no definite answer to this question, we can start by taking a look at the extremes on both the sides. On the extreme left are the communist countries. There aren't many left nowadays actually. The countries today that are officially communist are Laos, China, North Korea, Cuba, and Vietnam. While China is ruled by the Communist Party, modern China is not communist in any way. The USSR collapsed in a communist rule. North Korea, Vietnam, Cuba, and Laos are some of the worst countries on multiple indicators.
Even in India, until former Prime Minister Narasimha Rao liberalized our economy, our GDP grew at just under 3% every single year, the so-called Hindu rate of growth. If we had continued the previous socialist policies of the Nehru-Gandhi Congress, it is true that our country would have grown at a much lower rate and our wages today would be much lower. And it's undeniably true that after our independence, if we had taken a more rightward economy, rather than following the Soviet-style economic model, our country would have been in a much better shape today. On the other hand, the torchbearer of capitalism is the USA. While the USA looks sparkly from the outside, it has some of the worst inequalities and domestic issues in the world.
They hold more than 25% of the world's prisoners and have some of the highest per capita crime rates. They have the highest rates of depression, drug addiction, obesity, and many other health problems. On the economic level, they have the highest rates of bankruptcies anywhere in the world and have one of the worst wealth inequalities. 3 Americans today, just 3, Bill Gates, Jeff Bezos, and Warren Buffett, hold more wealth than the bottom half of the American population. That's more than 150 million people. They pay 10 times higher prices for the same drugs available elsewhere in the world. All of this due to unchecked capitalism. Now that we have proven that both the extremes are bad, what is the best form of government? While there is no single perfect form, we can definitely analyze which ones are better in comparison to the rest. One interesting answer is from former US presidential aspirant and entrepreneur Andrew Yang. He spoke of capitalism with a human touch. In that system, human beings and human life would be looked at as a valuable rather than a commodity. It aspires to understand and provide value to life and at the same time put a check on corporate greed and exploitation.
So let us watch an excerpt from the 8th Democratic Presidential Debate conducted by ABC Studios to get a better understanding of his vision.
George, we're in the midst of the most extreme winner-take-all economy in the history of our country. And unfortunately, that extremity is just going to reach unprecedented heights as technology is getting stronger, smarter, more capable all the time. And most of us are not. Most adults feel happy if we stayed about the same on any given day. And right now, we have fallen into this trap where we have allowed the market to tell us what we are all worth. And what does the market value my wife Evelyn at, or stay-at-home parents around the country? 0. Volunteers and activists in our communities trying to do something positive? 0. Coaches and mentors helping our kids? 0. Most artists, sorry artists, but it's true, 0. Increasingly local journalists, which is wiping out our ability to have a functioning democracy because you can't vote on something if you actually don't have any news coverage. The mission in this campaign has to be for us to disentangle economic value and human value, say they are not the same things, and make this case to our fellow Americans that we each have intrinsic value as citizens, as human beings, and as owners and shareholders of the richest country in the history of the world.
While it sounds extremely interesting and promising, the problem with this system is that it has not been successfully tested, so we cannot absolutely know its pros and cons. But it's far too good an idea to simply discount. The more proven way, however, can be found by looking at the countries which are at the absolute top on every single socio-economic indicator. If we remove all the city-states and tax havens, the one single form of government followed by every country at the top is democratic socialism with economic liberalism. It is mainly followed in Nordic countries like Denmark, Sweden, Finland, Norway, Iceland, etc. Outside Scandinavia, it's mainly followed in the Benelux countries. So what exactly happens in this system? Citizens pay extremely high tax rates, sometimes as high as 60%. In return, the government provides free and high quality healthcare, sickness and maternity benefits, social security, etc., apart from a great quality of life and education. So, should India adopt this system? Actually, under present circumstances, I think it would be a disaster. Firstly, we must understand that for a country to be successful as a social democracy, there are some prerequisites. These are high GDP per capita, high median household income, high quality of education in the country, and low population density. Actually speaking, India has neither of these four present. If we try to become a social democracy without having these prerequisites, our debt could increase and our economy could collapse, something like what happened in Greece. Full disclosure, I'm not a student of economics, but in my humble opinion, the best way moving forward for India would be first to reduce our bureaucracy and corruption as much as possible. Second, to create a business-friendly environment and incentivize businesses and industries to move into our country as much as possible. Third, and most importantly, to increase our tax collection while simultaneously decreasing our tax rate. But is it possible? In fact, it is. We can achieve this goal by increasing and broadening our tax base. Isn't it shocking that only 2% of Indians pay taxes? This is a particularly high burden on young job holders who have to pay taxes, while many people making much more in some exempted sectors like agriculture do not have to pitch in even a single nickel. Finally, I think we must tilt right of center for at least 2 to 3 decades. During this time, we must invest properly into infrastructure, R&D, manufacturing, healthcare, education, human resource development and many such fields which are heavily underfunded in India. And then, when we reach a level of economic stability and personal prosperity, we could transition slowly into a democratic socialist form of government. If you are interested in reading further on these topics, there are 2 books that I would highly recommend. The first is A Populist Guide to 2020 by Crystal Ball and Sagar NJT. Both of them are co-hosts of the show Rising on the Hill. The second book is The War on Normal People by Andrew Yang, whom we discussed previously. Both of these books are available in paperback and Kindle versions on Amazon. The link to buy these books will be in the description below. Hope you found this video informative. Please share your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you.